Welcome, everyone, to Seeing a Past and Seeing the Present. Quick reminder as we get started, please use the Q&A box on the right for all questions. The chat function can be used for all other comments. Our presenter will address as many questions as possible in the time we have. For any questions that we're not able to cover, the presenter will try to respond directly in this chat that you can access under Agenda after this presentation ends. Today, our presenter is Lois Peterson, an artist and professor of art emerita. Lois served as a faculty member in the Art and Art History Department at Gustavus Adolphus College, where she served as a professor of art for 27 years. She currently works for her private art studio in Dakota, Minnesota, where the focus of her large-scale drawings is land restoration and raising awareness regarding individual actions which serve to benefit the natural environment. With that being said, Lois, I'll hand it over to you to take it away.
Thank you, Cassidy. First, of course, I wish to thank the prairie enthusiasts and everybody for having me here today. I'm very excited to be here, but I'm also going to say I'm intimidated as well. I actually was watching the conference yesterday, and I'm in awe of all of your expertise and your knowledge, and it's humbling to be here amongst you all. I can't express to you the gratitude I have to all of you for the work that you're doing to know our place in time in regards to environmental actions that are needed. And I know that individually and collectively, we are going to make a difference, and we are making a difference, and we will continue to. Today, of course, as many of you realize, I am not a scientist, which many of you are and have my respect. I'm going to talk about how visual art has served and will always continue to serve as a means to engage with actions. It has actually been used since the beginning of human existence, I think, to express a viewpoint, with the intention, I think, of always of artists trying to influence an action as well. So even with my intimidation, it was too late for me to back out, as I almost felt like doing, because I felt I was out of my league and out of my comfort zone. But because it was too late, I'm going forward. I want to talk about one of the first critical parts of taking action is to make everybody aware of what the problem is or what the viewpoint is that you want to express. And one of the best ways that I have had in my life, of course, is to do it visually through artwork. And when that is done, a whole group of actions by a variety of endeavors can be pursued. Actions that address a particular viewpoint and put that viewpoint forward. I'm going to start off today with a few examples that many of us are very familiar with, I'm sure. For example, this is the work of Keith Haring. Keith Haring was an artist that worked diligently to raise the awareness of AIDS and its vast impact on the populace. One of the things that Keith Haring did, which was very influential, was he wasn't just a visual artist. Keith Haring really understood marketing. And his work, has been accused of being commodified. But in this case, I am not going to criticize that, because Keith's work brought the AIDS issue to the public visually. And I think through the use, Keith used this kind of childlike, beautiful, simplistic, colorful type of images. And he was able to bring a very deadly, very serious problem in a way that didn't scare people off. It didn't frighten them or address their fears. And I think because he did that, many people, I think, were able to actually think about their ideas regarding AIDS and think about kind of put their preconceptions away. This is some examples of Keith Haring's work. As I said, yes, his work was to some extent commodified, but he used everything he had: posters, murals, T-shirts, books, postcards. There wasn't a gift shop in a museum in America that you could go to that probably didn't have something of Keith Haring's work. And they were charming and they were childlike, but they also had a deep meaning. And the meaning really wasn't just about AIDS, it was really about love one another. I'm going to go a little bit larger scale as an example of art as used as an influencer. And this, of course, as we all know, is the AIDS quilt. On a national stage, the AIDS quilt just exploded the awareness of the AIDS epidemic. It's a massive piece of artwork. Each person could make a small block, and then that piece was added to a larger block, like a quilt block. And you think back upon, quilting bees in the past, and I think they still exist today. And it was all put together into this a gigantic piece of artwork that was then installed in various places in the country. And there was no way that this could be ignored, the topic, because of the sheer scale of this piece of artwork. I think it also did more than just raise awareness for a populace. I think it also allowed people who had personally been impacted by a loss with the AIDS epidemic to contribute something, to be part of something that made a big impact. So that even though they may have made only a small part of it, the impact was profound. I'm going to use a couple examples, again, that we all recognize. And one of them is a poster that we all saw in the post offices, I'm sure, called "I Want You," Uncle Sam's U.S. Army recruitment tool. It was designed during World War I, actually, to encourage enlistment in the military to serve in the war. The second one, of course, is sometimes referred to as Rosie the Riveter, and it was used during World War II to encourage women to fill in the workforces of that were vacated by the men who had actually responded to poster number 1, Uncle Sam Wants You. I think these pieces are examples that it's the visual, far more important than the words that are being used, that is encouraging the populace to make an action. The next example I'm going to show you is one that I experienced, in my own lifetime, and this was a silent majority poster, and it was used as a anti-Vietnam use during the Vietnam War, and you can't help but see that it's the stark image that sends the clear message that the war is killing our people. I'm going to take a moment right now, actually, to say I have chosen some examples for my presentation today. And I chose ones that were perhaps not very divisive. But I do want to say that visual art has always had a viewpoint. If it's Kendrick Lamar's halftime performance, which was visual and powerful, or it's Ai Weiwei, a Chinese artist that uses to poke at the Chinese government. There are many, many, many examples that are very profound and powerful. I have perhaps used sort of ones that don't go that deep, although not today. That's not to mean that I won't. I'm showing an example of a plow, and this is a plow actually that the La Crosse County Historical Society has. It's a sample, And it's a sample of the plows that were used by salespeople. They would go around to dealerships and they would take this sample because, you know, it's kind of hard to carry a plow around with you. And they would then sell this product to the dealerships, and the dealerships would sell them to the farmers, and the farmers would plow up the prairies. That was the whole point of this. And this is sometimes called a mold plow, or sometimes referred to as a bottom plow. And its point was to turn up the ground, turn up the roots, and plow them under to prepare the land for crop farming, obviously. So then we always have, you know, what are the questions that we need to ask when you want to deal with a situation in the visual arts? And then what is the issue? What is the root cause of those issues? What actions are you able to take? And what are the outcomes that you want to see? I think before I go to the next slide, I want to talk just a little bit about that youth, that one about what are you able to take? Because I have my limits, my own personal skill set, and they're not unlimited by any means. But it does not mean that I am less committed, that I am less passionate, but I certainly understand what I am capable of doing to contribute. So I'm going to start right now with a little personal journey in the visual arts and my own awareness. This one miserable little patch of land started a whole new awareness for me, and it called me to action. This is actually our yard about 15 years ago. It was a barren, dead landscape, and it happened to be the yard of our new home. What I brought to the project, to the problem, is that I do have an art background. I do have a studio practice. I have an education career in my past. And that's what I could bring to this. You would think, why would you buy this ugly patch of land? And if you look a little further out, it's on the Mississippi River. It is in the driftless area. It is absolutely drop dead gorgeous. And it is actually where I grew up. And even though this was a miserable patch of land, I was going to go forward. I'm going to talk just a second about that growing up part. The image in the middle is actually of the farm I grew up on. It was in Monroe County, Wisconsin, between Sparta and La Crosse, the driftless area, typical farm of that era. I'm in my early 70s, so I'll let you do the math. On each side of it, you're going to see images of the crops that were very typical of that time: hay, corn, oats. Everybody, today you might add soybeans. And I think, you know, today you're still going to see these somewhat same images. The difference, of course, as we all know, is that the farms have become much larger, fewer and larger. Some of the crops have remained the same, even though the fields, the fences are gone and the fields are much larger, still consisting of hay, oats, corn, and soybeans. This is a typical landscape that you can even see yet today. The herds were dairy, but of course the dairy herds, as we all know, have become completely much larger. And I think many people come to this area or from this area or visit this area, and they see this as the calendar art picture of farming. It's bucolic, it's pretty, the country roads, the whole bit. But I have to say, when I was growing up, and until I purchased the miserable patch of land, I never gave a whole great deal of thought as to what had existed on that land before these beautiful, bucolic cornfields, the strip farming, the dairy herds. What was there 300 years ago? And I wished I had thought of it. but I did not. And when my father used to plow up the field, of course, it was more modern times. That simple plow that I showed you earlier, that was in the historical society. By then, we were into modern farming techniques in that era already. My father would farm, and he would find these arrowheads in the freshly plowed fields. And I thought, oh, they were so interesting, the fascinating object, but I never went far enough back in my mind to think about the impact that the European immigration had on the farming practices. And the fact that they brought all these farming practices with them, and the tremendous destructive impact that had on the natural environment. And of course, it had this impact upon the very people that had left those fascinating arrowheads behind. Going back to that miserable patch of land, I started down the long rabbit hole, the long path of thinking about the larger picture. As we all know, is a very long path when you start looking at that bigger picture. And it was at that time that I really started to come to accept and recognize that I had personally been a beneficiary of those European immigrants, my ancestors that came from Europe and started farming using monocultural farming techniques, and the vast destruction of the prairie and woodland, that actually was my heritage. And it wasn't wonderful to realize that, as many truths are not. And while you've certainly, none of us can change history, I thought, and my husband thought, we could change this little 3-acre patch of land that we had along the Mississippi River. So then, I go in and ask these questions. What is the issue? Well, our yard is a dead zone. The root cause, complete lack of concern for the environment. What actions can I do? I can fix it. But first, I got to do a lot of learning, planning, and planting. And what is the desired outcome? I wanted a yard. I wanted a place, a land that supported the birds, the insects, and then the occasional frog that scares me to death when it lands on my leg when I'm not expecting it. And of course, it improved my own life. This is an image of the before and the after of our miserable patch of land a number of years later. Previously, our miserable patch of land was, gravel. And I'm here to say gravel is very heavy. If you got a shovel and you have to move or put down gravel, that is exhausting work. We made some mistakes. If you look at our after, you can see probably some of the mistakes. I know you guys are experts, and that's what's intimidating me, you guys. But we are working at it. We are now, as we continue our education forward, we are replacing some of the mistakes we made along the way with better choices. This is another example of our miserable patch of land. On the left-hand side, you see this bank that was covered with turf grass, mowed. That what you're seeing is probably the year we were trying to kill the turf grass, which was not as easy as we thought it would be. It was challenging. And the photograph on the right that you're seeing is it's what it looks like today. Planted willow tree. You can still see the railroad tracks over there to give you a point of perspective in the river. And the prairie plantings that we now put on it. I don't know how on earth they ever mowed that hill. My husband said that he was going to kill himself if he had to roll that lawnmower down there. So then we began to think of new solutions, which were amazing. This is another example of the restoration that we tried to do on these steep banks that had previously been mowed. And it has really given us a chance to think about what we want for the future. to sit out by this prairie bank, which is small, it's not huge. I mean, many of our friends, dear friends, they have acres of prairie and that is awesome. But we just got these little banks, but we love these little banks. And to sit out there with my coffee in the morning, life is good. In this image, you see that I have decided to start using the images from the prairies, from the miserable patch of land and what I'm learning from it, and it started to influence my drawing practice. I'll go through some of these examples at this time. So we have to ask the questions here to myself. How can I use my art to help to increase the public's awareness of the value of natural landscapes? And even a bigger question beyond that one is it possible that I could do something beyond just increasing awareness? By using these dormant plants, I had chosen them intentionally because I had a feeling that if I chose an absolutely beautiful prairie in full summer bloom, it wasn't going to convey the idea that I had that the prairies needed help. They looked fantastic. Why would you, think they were in need of help? So I always draw the prairie plants in their dormant states. I decided to draw the prairie plants in large scale. Um, Drawing large is somewhat more challenging than drawing small, but I felt it was important if I wanted the images to really get noticed. Botanical drawings historically have been rather modest in size, and then they're typical. So if I were to draw these huge, and I'd actually tried to draw them mostly life size. So I actually have the plant right next to me when I'm drawing. And I try to draw it close to, compositionally close to the accurate size that it is, that they would have more impact. I also want to say that when you're showing in a gallery walls are large. And if you draw modest, small sizes, they just get swallowed up on a big wall. And so even though it might be fine for a home where the walls are different, in a gallery, they tend to get minimized. Just a little personal side, when I saw the Mona Lisa, in real life, I was very taken aback by how small it was and kind of insignificant it looked, because it wasn't very big, it was just on an average size. So I went large for a reason. These are a couple of drawings of mine from this series. I tended sometimes to let the roots hang there. Not yet. You'll see the roots. They're coming up later in a little bit here. But sometimes they were untethered. On the left side, you'll see that it's kind of uprooted and cut off and just kind of dangling there. Again, that's not typical of botanical drawings, but it was for the intention that I wanted. Over time, the drawing started to tell me what it is they wanted. They wanted to have their roots shown. And I had felt that the roots were equally important to what was above the ground. I am struggling with my notes here a little bit, and so I had to catch up here with myself. I think with any engagement, and it doesn't matter if you are working on an event, working on a book, working on a piece of poetry, working on land restoration, whatever it is you're starting to do, working with, it starts to tell you where you're supposed to go. And this is where the roots started telling me that they too wanted to be a part of the story, not just what was above ground, but what was below ground. And we all know that's important. So there the roots started to show up. And you can see that I would use the drawings while looking at the roots and trying to figure out how they were supposed to be a part of it. And at some point, and I don't know when it happened, those roots and maybe those plants must have texted the logs that were toppling into the water. As you had seen, we live close to the Mississippi, right next to the Mississippi River, actually. And I had noticed since we've moved here an accelerated increase in how much the trees were toppling over, their roots becoming saturated by the frequent flooding. Now, flooding is, as we all know, somewhat cyclical and happens normally, but it was happening at rather an accelerated rate. And so there was a lot of wood in the rivers and a lot of trees being toppled over. So the next thing you know, they too needed to be a part of this story of environmental alarm. We were also at the same time working on a little 2-acre patch of land that was woodland when we, is still woodland when we purchased it. And it was overtaken by all of our friend buckthorn. Yeah, I didn't even know what buckthorn looked like 15 years ago. And now every time I see buckthorn, my knee hurts because, as many of us know, when you're removing buckthorn, you can slide down a slow, slippery, snowy slope and tear meniscus. So every time I see a buckthorn, I get a good reminder. I really knew that we were serious about restoring this little patch of 2 acres right along the wood. It's between the river and the road. It's kind of jammed in there next to railroad property, and it was overtaken by everything you don't want. And I knew that it was serious about getting it restored when my husband one day came home from the hardware store with a pickaxe. I think a pickaxe means you mean business. And so he obviously became very dedicated to restoring this. And while we still have a lot of work to do, we have reintroduced ferns. We have bloodroots. I see hundreds of jack-in-the-pulpits are coming up every spring. And so while we do have a lot of work to do, we have learned a lot. One of the things we learned just recently, which you will probably all laugh about because it's so naive, is that if you plant oak saplings, maybe you should cage them. Because if you don't cage them, you have just fed a whole herd of rabbits. So this spring, we will be returning to the woods with our new saplings of red oaks, and we have caging material with us this time around. When I go down into these woods, I see things that are architecturally beautiful. The tree roots, this is, of course, as many of you know, a cottonwood. Cottonwoods have fascinating bark patterns on them. And they became a material, a subject matter for some of my drawings, as you can see on the right. I think each trip I took to the woods, which is right next, I'm looking at it right now, actually, you guys. I'm sitting by a window looking out, and I'm looking at the trailhead right here that my husband opened up with that pickaxe. With further information, just feeds my studio practice. These tree roots example, they were architecturally so interesting to me. They were actually, to some extent, more interesting than all those cathedrals that I studied in art history and visited. They were architecturally structures that held up this large cathedral of tree. It was fascinating. Each trip to the woods, to the river, to the stream on our property, it's an artesian spring that runs all winter. It feeds my practice. It is the material that I bring back to the studio. In the recent exhibition of my work, I wanted to include some additional information besides just looking at drawings on the wall. I think I wanted a bigger context of what this drawings were about. This photograph was loaned to me, given permission to use from the Murphy Library at University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. And it shows the logs that were being floated down the Black River to the sawmills in La Crosse. And you can actually see, I circled in red, this gentleman, it was interesting, he had on a vest and a white shirt, sitting on the logs, and it gives you just a point to understand the vastness of these logs jams that were sent down the rivers. And I live in an area that is, had vast woodlands that were cut down for timber and used, then converted into crop farms. And I frequently hear the term, in these fancy, beautiful, gigantic homes of lumber baron homes. This is a lumber baron home. That is a lumber baron home. And it all sounds very romanticized. But this is what a lumber baron did. They cut down the timbers. They profited vastly from it. Most of it was land that had been gifted to them by the US government, taken from the indigenous people, and that's how they made their fortunes. And I think it's not quite as bucolic and beautiful a history as the word lumber baron sounds. I would have a lot different names for a lumber baron, but I don't need to give those today. This is an example of some of the drawings that I was working on. I wanted the timbers to be isolated, to be removed from their environments. I wanted them to be taken away. When I was working on these, I was reminded of the lyrics, of course, of Joni Mitchell. Cut down all the trees and put them in a tree museum. They started to develop almost a look of like an anatomical study of the actual logs, the branches that I was dragging into my studio. I have a few insects in the house now, thanks to this, but small problem. When I look back on my career, I wished that I had gone into like a medical illustration. I know some of you are in that field, and I wished I had had that education. Well, drawings have a tendency to pile up in a studio, and this is my studio, and this is my drawing pile up, almost like logs, you might think. This particularly happens to artists like myself, who are very good at going to the studio, love to draw, love to work in the studio, hate marketing. So here we go. We have this large pile up of drawings. And then you have to ask yourself, what am I going to do with all these drawings that are piling up? I made an inventory, and I'm going to do with the not so good first. I'll go to the right side first. Number one, I am not a botanist. I am not a land restoration expert like many of you. I'm not a trained naturalist like many of you. And sadly, I'm not even wealthy. But there is a good side, and the good side is I am retired, meaning I have time. I am a trained artist and an educator. I do have exhibition opportunities, and I want to be involved. I want to be involved in something that contributes to an issue that I believe and I want to support. And that issue is that we need to support the environment that we live in, as all of you are doing. Art exhibitions that focus on an issue give you an opportunity. It gives you an opportunity to do the following. You can build community, raise awareness, share information, and depending upon how you, what your outcomes is that you want, it can also help to raise funds. Not all of these are used in every exhibition, but you can kind of gear your work towards these outcomes. And this is an example taken from a recent exhibition held last fall. I was in Lanesboro, Minnesota. And you can see again the size of the walls and the issue of why I have to draw so big so that they actually have some kind of a presence in them. But what I like about doing an exhibition is that when you have an exhibition, you can also add additional programming for that exhibition. It's not just like, oh, let's hang up some art on the walls and look at it. It's not enough for me. This is an example of some of the drawings that I had been working on, a detailed shot and the whole piece. Art openings. And the opening reception is where conversations happen. This is actually the art opening for that exhibition you just saw. This is facing the sales gallery. The exhibition is actually in a gallery, the other side of it. That's why it looks different. But it gives you a place for people to come and to talk and to share ideas, to meet with their communities. By giving attendees at the art opening free prairie plants, there was a chance that I could help get some of these plants into the ground beyond my own little miserable patch of land. And some of the people would come to the art opening because it had been advertised that there would be free prairie plants available. And that's good. There's nothing wrong with that. Some people came because they wanted to see the drawings. Some people came because there was a free prairie plant. Some came because there was an awesome musician playing that night. There was food, there was beverages, there was a chance to talk with your communities. It was all good stuff. Oh, look at that Prairie Enthusiast t-shirt. I love it. I think it's important to bring in experts. And I have openly admitted I'm not the expert. But because I have a background in education, I know how to find those experts. I know where to look for them. And they are always so generous in stepping forward. This was a talk that was given on a different night. I don't like to do programming during the night of an opening because by then you have food and music and conversations. Nobody wants all that interrupted to listen to me talk or even somebody else to talk for that matter. So, I think it's important to do programming on different times. And it also tends to bring in different special interest groups. For this talk, people who were really interested in having some answers to questions they had about situations in regards to land restorations they were having. And so the person could really focus on their questions. If I give a gallery a talk about art, sometimes the talk will veer off to what kind of pencil lead I use or what kind of paper I'm using. And that's all good too. But it really is important to sort of sometimes divide that up so that everybody gets the part they're particularly interested in. I think whenever possible, you want to bring in the resources. And I want to thank Prairie Moon Nursery. They're only 10 miles from where I live. They provided for the exhibition free seed packets, germination codes, catalog stickers, so people could pick up information where they could get more of where they can go for answers. I am changing topics a little bit, but it all has to do with the information about how art can serve an issue or a cause. And I'm going to show two examples coming up here. One is from Ohio, and one is from South Africa. I was involved with both of these examples to some extent, in some capacity. Art can also reflect a cultural identity and this is the one with these outcomes I talked about, can offer opportunities for economic support. The one I just showed you about the exhibition wasn't really about economic support. It was really the other factors. I was invited to go to northern South Africa to work with Zulu artists. I spent the vast majority of my career actually as a ceramic artist. And I switched to drawing about 15 years ago for health reasons. The health reasons that had to do with harsh chemicals used in the 1960s, I'm afraid. But the Zulu had a problem, and their problem was they made these exquisitely beautiful, large smoked vessels. The problem was those beautifully large, exquisite vessels did not fit into a suitcase. Because it didn't fit in the suitcase, sales wouldn't happen. And they needed the income. And as we all know, ceramic vessels do not squish down very easily into a suitcase. So they didn't have sales. They needed sales. This is an example. I was working with a Zulu artist in an art center in Rorke's Drift, way up in northern KwaZulu land. And the ceramic artists that were making those very ceramic vessels, we switched to making ceramic tiles. I think it was critically important that the culture be retained. So it was the same clay artists that were working. They were using the same clay. They were using the same firing technique. They were using their same imagery. They did all the design work. The only difference was they were adding to their repertoire of products a ceramic tile that fit in that suitcase. By doing so, they had an increase in sales and an increase in much needed income. So sometimes art can produce income. And here is just an example of the people working on the tiles. Some of the tiles that were then for sale and continue to be for sale today. They're really exquisite. I'm going to show you one last example, and this is from the Promise Quilters of Ohio. They were a small group of dedicated artists, quilt makers. They were, as I consider, artist activists, and they accomplished to me an amazing feat. Their goal was to raise awareness of breast cancer. And they did so by making a quilt collectively by the group every year. They designed the quilt, they made it together, and they sold raffle tickets for it. They did the following, including raising funds. They built community. Everybody who worked on the quilt was a breast cancer survivor. They connected with organizations that shared their same cause. In this case, it was a Susan G. Komen Foundation, the Race for the Cure, which we're familiar with. They raised public awareness, and they also raised funding for cancer research. If you were not a quilter, I'm personally not a quilter. I love quilts. I'm not a quilter myself. Every person, even if you were not a quilter, could contribute, because as we all know, there's a lot of tasks and a lot of events that have to happen. If you weren't a quilter, maybe you cut the fabric, maybe you ironed the fabric, maybe you made the lunches, served the coffee, or maybe you went to these festivals every weekend to sell raffle tickets. And that's what this is, a photograph of our members that are selling raffle tickets at events. And my sincere amazement of these people, every weekend, this was in Sylvania, Ohio, which is right outside of Toledo. They would go to events all summer long, every weekend, where you can see an example of the quilt in the background here, and they would sell raffle tickets. And everybody had a part, even if you weren't a quilter, because everybody gets affected by breast cancer. So they would pair with organizations, events that had nothing to do with cancer. They went to rodeos, street rod shows, farmers markets, music festivals, everything, everywhere, every weekend within 50 miles. Over the course of just 13 years, the Promise Quilters raised $277,000, which was donated to support breast cancer research through the Susan G. Komen Foundation. They would announce the winner of the raffle quilt on the Race for the Cure Day. I recently talked with a person when I was preparing this presentation that had been involved with this project. And he told me that in the first couple of years that they did this, they raised between $2,000 and $3,000 for the raffle tickets that they sold. But the last couple of years, they were raising between $25,000 and $30,000 because it had gained name recognition and longevity. So people would come to a festival and they would say, "Oh, look at over there. There's the Promise quilt. Oh, yeah, that's about breast cancer. Let's go get some of those tickets. I know about this, you know." So I'm just was amazed that the longevity and name recognition played so prominently in the amazing funding that they were able to accomplish. I'm going to finish up today and with just a what if scenario. And art activism can work for the restoration and conservation of land. I want to say that the materials don't matter. It doesn't matter if it's a graphic design for a poster or a ceramic tile or a drawing or a quilt or woodworking. Whatever it is that you work on can be applied to a cause through visual art. So what if the quilt, instead of for breast cancer, which is great, what if it was about prairie plants and land restoration? What if the quilt was announced on Earth Day? What if every raffle ticket came with a free seed packet included with it? So I think it's important that you can try to figure out how can these be altered to the cause that you are personally wanting to see supported and the awareness wanting to be raised, or funds or involvement. Art and activism often share some of the same underlying emotions, and it has throughout all of the history of visual art, all the way from cave paintings to halftime performances. You're communicating a perspective that you want to get out there. You're speaking out about one's beliefs, and you're hoping that somebody will take action by changing the way they're thinking about something. This is the last image I'm going to show, and I'm going to end with this. And I can't tell you how thankful I am for having been allowed to come here today, feeling quite a bit out of my wheelhouse, I might say. I designed this little graphic recently. It's a bookmark, you guys, that I made, and they are available. You just contact me and I'll be glad to send you a packet of them if you want to. I ordered a lot of them because they were cheap the more you ordered. So if you'd like a packet of them to give out in your organizations, on your tables, please just let me know and I'll send them to you. Go deep, plant a prairie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lois, for that engaging presentation. We've had a question come in from someone who was curious if you have researched the history and roots of botanical illustration, especially as it relates to how you are thinking about your family history and work as a generally ecologically focused artist.
I have. And the reason I had to do it was because I never was taught that in art school. Botanical drawings, when I went through school, would have been considered too pictorial. It would have been, I went through school when it was all hard edge paintings and abstract expressionist, and it wasn't about botanical drawings. And so when I find myself being drawn to these, there was nothing in my background that prepared me for this. So I did what any good person does. I go and I start looking on used book sites, and I go, and I start looking for botanical drawing illustrations. I start ordering those books, and I had to self-educate myself. And I'm, of course, blown away by the beauty of them and the sheer delicacy of them. Yes, I mean, that part I had to self-teach.
We also speak to kind of where you go to collect your natural materials. Is it just off of your own property, or do you have any particular prairie sites that you go to for inspiration?
I do. I don't have everything in my own prairies that I want. I keep planting, but they don't always succeed. So yes, I do use my own little prairie plant areas here, but I'm also lucky. I live in outside of La Crescent by La Crosse area. We do have prairies that are available in the area. And I have one up here up on the ridge right above me that is a lot of acreage. And so I will look up there at it's always at the end of the season when the plants are in their dormant sense and get a few that I don't have that I want. Yeah.
You've spoken a lot about a lot of different kinds of artists who have used activism, in a lot of different ways. Are there
Mhm.
any specific, like, environmental artists or writers who have inspired your work?
There is. And I think the list is so long that I hate to cherry pick just a couple of them. Um, I think of Mark Dion. Mark is an artist that has raised awareness about bringing in rats where they don't belong, and then wiping out the native mammals and stuff. And so there have been for me. There are people who haven't necessarily used prairies or woodlands as their concern, but have done a lot politically, powerful stuff. I mentioned briefly Ai Weiwei, who is a Chinese artist that has certainly not flinched from political discourse with his art statements. And sometimes that's risky. I mean, I don't think it's risky for me to, promote prairies, but there are other areas that it's very risky. And I admire their tenacity.
You've studied and, done art all over the world. What do you find unique about art in the Midwest specifically?
That's unique. Nothing. And I don't mean that sarcastically. I mean that inclusively. We are all part of it. It doesn't matter if you're in the Midwest, you're in Northern South Africa, or you're in Italy, where I've also taught. Um, we all part of a bigger collective. Uh, yeah, I have my own focus. Yes, that I'm interested in. But that doesn't make it unique or special. I mean, it's all good, whether you're in Italy or Zululand or La Crosse, Wisconsin, it all has a place at the table. And there's much more commonality than anything. I think that's what's shocking. Well, like for example, when I was in Zululand, I don't speak Zulu, and they didn't speak English. It didn't really matter. We didn't need that language. We didn't need that spoken language. Not, we had the visual language. That's all we needed. It was good. Um, we could laugh. We could change our opinions or what we were doing. So art, making it in the Midwest or making it in Zululand, much more similar than different. Maybe I was afraid of those poisonous snakes. Okay, they got a lot of poisonous snakes up there. Okay, that was different. I've only got the timber rattlers here, but they got some other ones that are doozies.
Mm-hmm. As someone who has been doing art for a really long time, do you have anything that you incorporate into a daily artistic practice?
I do. I try to work 3 hours a day in my studio, and I'm pretty consistent. And it's like anything that you're going to move forward with, whether it's playing the a musical instrument. I have friends that are concert pianists. They're at that piano at least 3 hours a day, even though they're amazing. All right. And the same is, I think, true for myself. I work 3 hours a day in my studio. That doesn't sound like a whole lot, 3 hours. That seems a little light. But I find, I don't count the time I'm in the prairie or walking around or looking at stuff. I don't count that. But I actually try to be in my studio 3 hours a day. And if I am doing that, which I tend to do, then of course, the things pile up, the drawings and the exhibitions happen. But if you don't have a consistent work pattern, for me, it gets too fractured. I can't stay straight. I can't move forward.
Can you speak to how your collections of drawings of prairie plants and timbers evolved out of your previous work?
Yeah, I can. I worked for 7, 8, 9 years in drawing, and I worked large, and I worked with great detail in abstract work. So I did not draw realistically. I drew abstractly, and it wasn't that I could not draw realistically. I just never found a subject matter that interested me enough until it happened. So it wasn't like a lack of ability at drawing. I drew large graphite line drawings that were abstract in nature. They weren't necessarily abstract in content in my mind. Abstract art doesn't lack content. It's just less in your face, less obvious perhaps. And so I just took that, and when I started drawing realistically, I had already been drawing for years. Yeah.
And then we're going to end with just kind of one last question, kind of looking ahead to the future. You have your website there so people can find you online. Do you have any hopes or thoughts of what you want to do with your art moving forward? And then where can people find your work if you have any exhibitions coming up that you'd like to advertise?
Yeah. If I keep my website up to date, which is hit and miss, it would be there. And sometimes it is. I have exhibitions coming up in 2026-7. I think I have one at the Overture Center at the James Waltros Gallery in Madison coming up. I'm also doing one at Beckettwood, which is a senior citizen cooperative coming up in Minneapolis. Having one come up in Winona. So I will have those. You can also purchase if you wish. Please it's not necessary, but some of these drawings have been made into print editions, and they're archival. I have an amazing printmaker who just is stunning. And he does a print edition for me, a limited edition of so they are available in that way, so that they have a more affordable price point, I might add. They come in a couple different sizes so that people who want one that, can't afford I always said, somebody would ask me, what would success look like for you financially? And I said, being able to afford my own artwork. Well, that would be great. So anyway, I did the print editions to help it make them more affordable. It's not so much about what I want to see my artwork go as I want my artwork to impact people in a positive way towards helping the environment. That sounds kind of lofty, but if that is the end goal, that's what I really want. I want change. I want awareness, you know? If not, it's just light. That's it. That's all I got.
Well, well, thank you, Lois, so much for taking the time to, give us this engaging presentation today. That wraps up our session. Everyone, the next session on our agenda is at 1 o'clock, so we'll see you in an hour and a half. Thank you again, Lois, and
Thank
have a great
you.
rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you. Thank everybody. I appreciate you.
Bye.